I basically got into cycling back in 2016, and it really came from quite a dark place actually. It came from a place of pain.
Mm.
I'd been through quite a difficult event in my life at the end of 2014. My long-term partner and I broke up. We've been together for about 7 or 8 years and just found that really difficult and was struggling quite badly with depression after that, which led to a suicide attempt, which I was really lucky to survive. And it was after surviving the car crash that I just knew I had to do something different. I knew I had to make some changes. I'd been drinking a lot at the time. That was one of my ways of coping with how I was feeling. And I just knew that if I keep living my life this way, then it's not going to end very well. So I knew I had to do something different. And I was inspired to get into cycling by Sir Chris Hoy. And the rest is history.
I mean, what was it about Chris Hoy though? Like, I mean, 11-time world champion, 6-time Olympic champion, but what was it about him specifically that kind of made you think, right, it's cycling for me?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting question because when I heard Sir Chris Hoy talking, so I'd been at an event in Edinburgh through my business. I had my own business at the time, and it was just like a business networking event, really. But I was not there because I thought I want to hear an Olympian or I want to hear Sir Chris Hoy. I had no interest really in cycling, and I only had interest in sport from being a fan and watching football growing up. So I was there for business reasons, but there was just something about Sir Chris's talk that day that really inspired me. And I think what's interesting about that moment in my life is that I think there was something within me that always wanted to do this. Like, I think there was a part of me that always wanted to be an athlete and always wanted to get involved in sport. And Sir Chris Hoy helped me see it that day. Through him telling his story and sharing some of his achievements and things he'd done in the Olympics,
Mm.
it just awoke a part of me that I'd never really had access to. And I thought, do you know what? I want that as well. Although I didn't really realize that at the time, I just thought, right, I'm going to get into cycling. But I think as I went further along my cycling journey, I started to have bigger ambitions, thinking, I want to set records and I want to become a champion and I want to win big races. I think that day, Sir Chris Hoy awakened that part in me, really. And so, yeah, it was a really special moment for me.
That's amazing. I mean, we love a world record as well, SOHK. Like, just over a year ago, we broke the longest ever match of full contact rugby, which is awesome. And last year, you broke the record for the North Coast 500, completing 560 miles in 31 hours and 70 minutes. What made you set out to break that record? Like, where was the moment of, right, I'm not just into cycling, I'm going to go out and break a world record?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of stuff that happens in between getting into cycling in that moment. So when I had the idea to get into cycling by being inspired by Sir Chris Hoy, the idea that I had at that time was I'm going to cycle around the world. So that was the challenge and the goal that I set myself. And I went and tried that the following year, and I set off my first attempt at that, but I never finished it the first time. And I basically ended up having a few different attempts at it. And, just there was loads of times things were going wrong and, I just wasn't quite making it. And I think, mentally I wasn't in the greatest place back then as well. So, I don't think I really had the headspace to actually go and do what was required to cycle all the way around the world. But eventually I managed to go and do it, almost pretty much finished it, except for when I was just a few thousand miles from the end. I got hit by a car in America, and so I've still not been able to get back to finish it because of that accident, and it's been since the pandemic. So I think everybody knows that I would have finished it if that never happened, because I was so close. So, but really, that journey that took me on cycling around the world was, when I started that, I was a guy who, never grew up with an interest in cycling. Spent my life, involved with drugs and alcohol, things like that. That was a lot of my life when I was growing up. And, I was not sporty or athletic in any real way. But going on that journey of cycling around the world, when I started that, I was in such a bad place mentally, physically, emotionally. And just through that process of committing to cycling around the world, waking up every day, putting in the miles, I was just started to get a lot fitter, get a lot faster. And over time, I just developed a real passion and love for cycling. And it became the number one passion. In the beginning, it had never really been that. The bike had just been a vehicle essentially for, this I suppose emotional journey that I was on. Like I never set off to try and cycle around the world because it'd been a dream of mine. I wanted to be happy. I wanted to try and change my life. I wanted to try and do something positive because of the place that I'd been at that time. But that gradually evolved into just a real passion for cycling, and actually thinking, you know what, I really believe in myself, and I think I've got the chance to go on to, you know, do some big things. So I think that was really how it kind of originated.
Yeah, it's amazing to think as well. I mean, you can be in the physically in such a great physical condition, but it's also that mental position to be able to take on a challenge like that. So you must have had some massively grueling moments during that challenge. And as you know, SOHK is currently doing LEJOG, and almost 100 of our supporters will be cycling the length of the UK. And they're bound to have some bumps during the challenge. So do you have any top tips that you can share from your own experience on how to avoid bonking on your bike and what kind of things kept you going?
Yeah, I think there's loads of different things that you could start with here, but I think there's some things that are just really practical that you need to think about. There's also things that are probably on a more deeper psychological level. I think first and foremost, I think the deeper stuff is probably the most important thing. You know, we can get into all the tactics and the nutrition and things you need to do on the day, but when you're taking on a challenge like Land's End to John O'Groats, it's like the UK's biggest cycling challenge. You're trying to cycle the entire length of the United Kingdom. So I think first and foremost, you've got to just believe in yourself that, you know, I believe I can do this, and that when I get out there, there's going to be no doubts that we can do this. You know, start with that self-belief. Like, I believe in myself. I've got what it takes to do this challenge, because there is going to come times when you're on that, when you're, you know, on one of the tough sections where you're climbing up a huge hill or a mountain, and, you know, those doubts and fears can start to creep in. So it's just reminding yourself, you know what, I do believe myself and I'm capable to do this. I think that's first and foremost. Something for me as well that's always been important is commitment. You know, the process of commitment. It's something that earlier in my cycling career never really had at all, and that was a real issue for me. But later on, when I committed to cycling around the world, and basically what that done for me was, I said to myself on my final attempt at around the world, I said, I'm going to cycle around the world and I'm not going to stop until I finish. I'm making 100% commitment to this. And basically what that done for me was that anytime something went wrong, anytime there was obstacles, there was no option except getting back in the bike and just finishing it. And there were so many obstacles along the way. Like, my bike got stolen, I got sick a couple of times, I had to fly home for a new passport, I got hit by a car in America. Every time I went through any of those big problems or obstacles, there was only one option, which is, right, how do I get back in the bike and finish this? Because I'm committed to that challenge. So if you're doing something like Land's End to John O'Groats, make that commitment to yourself when you start. You say, I'm going to cycle to John O'Groats no matter what. Doesn't matter how tough it is, doesn't matter how cold you are, doesn't matter how bad the weather is, doesn't matter how sore your legs are, you're going to finish it no matter what. Even if you only have to go at 5 miles an hour, but you're just moving forward a tiny wee bit, you're going to finish it just for the sake of finishing it. So I think that's, on the psychological level, that's probably my biggest tips. On a real practical level, you just need, there's a few things you really need to keep on top of. So number one for me is nutrition. Nutrition is where you could succeed or fail, because if you don't get your nutrition right, you'll just not have the fuel and the energy on the day to finish it. And so for me, a lot of the stuff that I've done in the past few years, some like really big cycles, you know, 30 plus hours, the golden rule that I usually have is 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrates every hour. And that is religious. Like, you do not waver on that. It's non-negotiable. You need to make sure that every hour you're taking that in, because if you fall behind for an hour and a half, you've not taken on the carbohydrates that you need, you'll just hit the wall and you'll just literally not have anything to keep moving forward. So really just keep on top of the nutrition, and that's probably the biggest practical tip that I would give for actually when you're doing it.
Brilliant. And when you broke the North Coast 500 as well, you did it for Baylor Scott and White Medical Centre, which is where you were treated, right?
Yeah.
How did you go about raising funds, and what kind of fundraising tips do you think you can give our riders?
I think when it comes to raising funds, something that I've always done quite well, and I think what works, is that I've always tried to raise funds for things that I was passionate about or that had a direct relation to what I was doing. So when I first started cycling, I raised quite a lot of money for mental health charities. And that was because I had a story of mental health and I had issues with mental health. And so it just made sense that, you know, I was a guy who had suffered with mental health. I was taking on this challenge and I was going to raise money for mental health charities. That just made sense, because when I was talking about the fundraising campaign, I was trying to promote it. It worked really well to get interviews with media and stuff like that, because rather than trying to just tell them, right, we're trying to raise money for this charity, they were interviewing me. And the media are always more interested in personal stories, because that's what people want to read about. So if you can find a way to link what you're doing into something that's actually related to a cause, that's one of the best tips I would have as well. And I think as well, people always relate to that a lot more. Because for example, if you've got somebody, I'll give you the best example actually. Recently, I just got told that I've got arthritis in my hip, which is something that I never really expected to have. But for me now this year, there's part of me, this is how my mind works. There's part of my mind already starting to think about, right, well, I'm going to do a world record attempt this summer, which I'm thinking about. And I thought, well, I could maybe raise money for an arthritis charity because I've now got that. And it would be a cool story for some guy who's got arthritis to go and take on a world record and show other people with arthritis that it's possible to still go out and live a great life and perform at a high level. So that, it just makes sense. So if you're going to fundraise, try and see if there's ways you can tie it into who you are, a bit of your story. And if you're comfortable sharing that, that's a good way to get people to buy into the cause.
It's natural, isn't it? If you're fundraising for a charity, that you're going to have some kind of personal connection to it. So yeah, it's definitely always those personal stories that people want to hear and want to give to. I have to ask about your accidents and your injuries because you are a force of nature. At SOHK, in our sessions for our adults and children, we talk a lot about growth mindset, and we talk a lot about DNA of a champion and what it entails. So you were hit by a car in Texas while cycling, had multiple injuries. Was it 10 broken ribs, punctured lung? And that was at the end of 2019. And, most people probably take a break, watch a year's worth of Netflix, but not soon afterwards, you're back in the saddle and setting a new record. That must take a huge amount of resilience and real strength of character to not only recover from those injuries, but then, to literally get straight back on the bike. So where did you, and where do you, because, your circumstances are similar now, where do you find that strength and resilience to keep pushing forward?
I think it comes from a few different places. I think when I had the big crash in America at the end of 2019, when I was cycling around the world, I'd made a commitment to cycling around the world. And I said, I'm going to cycle around the world no matter what, and nothing will stop me. So when I had the car crash in America, I was just like, cool, when can I get back on the bike? Because I've got a challenge to finish. It came really from that place of commitment. And I've actually always been really proud of the fact that when I was in hospital and, from the moments of being first conscious and being in the emergency room and realizing what had happened, my first thought really was, I'm getting back on the bike no matter what. And I was so rock solid on that. And that came from that commitment. But I think part of it for me as well is also, I just love cycling so much. Like, I just love it. It's my entire life. Everything in my life revolves around cycling. And there's nothing else for me to do. I couldn't, if it's not this, what's it going to be? So if I go through a big crash and I think to myself, right, do you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. What else am I going to do? Like, I just don't know what I could do. I just feel this is what I was born to do. And it just, having that love for it just drives me so much. And I think one of the good things about being injured is that every time I'm injured and I'm on the couch for 4 or 5 weeks, it just really reminds me how much I actually do love cycling. And so I think one of the reasons why I always come back for these accidents and injuries is that having that process of being out for 4, 5, 6 weeks just makes me miss cycling so much. So I'm just desperate to get back on the bike. And I just honestly couldn't imagine ever doing anything else with my life.